The scent of St. Jude's private wing doesn't smell like a hospital. It smells like a five-star hotel in Zurich. Over-filtered air, expensive wood polish, and the faint metallic tang of the highest-tier medical technology money can buy. There is a specific silence here, too. It's not the heavy, suffocating silence of a morgue, but the quiet, cushioned hush of extreme wealth. It's the sound of problems being solved before they ever reach the ears of the people paying the bills. I stood in the center of the atrium, my heels making a sharp, rhythmic click against the Italian marble. It's a sound that usually commands attention in a boardroom, but here, in the kingdom of Dr. Alistair Thorne, I was just another piece of background noise. I watched the staff move with a practiced, liquid grace. They weren't just nurses, they were hospitality experts with medical degrees, trained to anticipate the whims of the billionaire class. My eyes drifted to the north elevator, the one that leads to the VIP suites. 8 months ago, that elevator was the border I couldn't cross. My mother had been lying in an ER bay 3 miles away, her lungs filling with fluid, while this wing sat at 40% capacity. I remember the smell of that public hospital, stale coffee, bleach, and the copper scent of trauma. I remember the resident telling me there were no beds available for complex respiratory cases without prior elective scheduling. What he meant was, she isn't worth the overhead. Today, I wasn't here as a grieving daughter. I was here as a disruption. I walked toward the administrative suite, a glass-walled fortress overlooking the manicured courtyard. Behind the desk sat a woman whose face was a masterpiece of clinical indifference. Her name tag read Elena, Patient Relations. I have a 10:30 with Dr. Thorne. My voice was level, stripped of any emotional tremor. Elena didn't look up from her monitor. She was busy adjusting a spreadsheet that likely represented more money than the average zip code sees in a decade. Dr. Thorne doesn't take unscheduled appointments, and his schedule is finalized through Q3. If you're looking for the billing department, they're in the basement of the West Annex. I'm not here for billing, Elena, and I'm not unscheduled. Check the portal for the Federal Healthcare Oversight and Grant Management Liaison. She paused then, her fingers hovering over the mechanical keyboard. She looked up, her gaze scanning my tailored charcoal suit, Celine, understated, meant to signal regulatory authority rather than nouveau riche. She didn't see it. She saw a woman under 40, alone, without a diamond the size of a grape on her finger. In this ecosystem, if you aren't the hunter, you're the prey. The liaison is supposed to be Mr. Henderson, she said, her lip curling slightly. He's been our contact for 5 years. We have a very comfortable relationship with his office. Mr. Henderson took an early retirement on Friday. His office underwent a restructure. I'm the new lens through which St. Jude's will be viewed. She let out a short, dry laugh, the kind of sound someone makes when a child explains how they're going to be an astronaut. Right. Well, Ms. Lenz, Dr. Thorne is currently in a budget briefing for the new oncology pavilion. It's a $40 million project funded by the donors on this wall. She gestured to a series of gold-leafed plaques. He doesn't have time to walk a junior auditor through the basics of private health care. I'm not here for the basics, I said, stepping closer to the glass. I'm here for the audit of the Hill-Burton compliance files and the Section 1115 waiver disbursements. St. Jude's received $14 million in federal subsidies last year, specifically earmarked for emergency overflow and community indigent care. I'd like to see the bed utilization logs for night of March 14th. Elena's expression shifted from indifference to a cold, sharpened hostility. She stood up, using her height to establish a physical hierarchy. I don't know who you think you are or what kind of chip you have on your shoulder, but this is a premier institution. We don't overflow, we provide elite care. If you want to play bureaucrat, go to a county hospital. Now I'm going to call security to escort you to the parking lot before you make a scene that your career won't recover from." I watched her hand reach for the sleek black internal phone. I didn't move. I didn't reach for my ID. I simply observed the way the sunlight hit the gold-leafed names of the donors. I thought about the EBDA reports I'd spent the last 72 hours dissecting. I thought about the patient mix strategies Thorne had pioneered, a polite term for systemic exclusion. Thorne was a man who understood the price of everything and the value of nothing. He viewed federal funding as a birthright, a silent subsidy to keep his margins high and his VIPs pampered. He didn't realize that a subsidy is a contract, and contracts have clauses. "Go ahead, Elena," I said softly. "Call them. I'd actually prefer to have more witnesses for what happens next." She hesitated, her finger hovering over the dial. In that moment, the double doors behind her opened. Dr. Alistair Thorne stepped out, flanked by two men in white coats who looked more like bodyguards than physicians. He was exactly as he appeared in the journals, silver-haired, tanned from a recent trip to the Amalfi Coast, radiating the kind of absolute certainty that only comes from never being told no. "My dear," he said, the dear dripping with a condescension so thick it was almost tactile. "I don't know what they told you at the department, but we don't do audits here. We do reviews, and we do them in my timeline, in my boardroom, with my lawyers present. You've clearly skipped a few steps in the social and professional ladder. Now, why don't you head back to the city, tell your supervisors that there's been a misunderstanding, and we'll send over the usual redacted summaries by the end of the month." He turned his back to me, dismissing my existence with a flick of his wrist as he started walking toward the elevator. "And Elena, make sure she doesn't get a visitor's pass ever again." I felt the coldness in my chest settle into something hard and indestructible. "Dr. Thorne," I called. He didn't stop. "The federal grant you're waiting to allocate," I said, my voice cutting through the quiet atrium like a scalpel. "The $14 million for the oncology pavilion. I didn't just come here to audit the logs. I signed the rescission order 3 hours ago. As of 8 a.m., St. Jude's is officially flagged for material breach of federal funding requirements." Thorne stopped. The two men beside him stopped. The silence in the atrium suddenly felt very different. It wasn't the silence of wealth anymore. It was the silence of a crash. He turned around slowly, his face no longer showing that patronizing smile. His eyes narrowed, scanning me again, this time looking for the weapon he'd missed. "You're joking," he said, though the slight twitch in his jaw suggested he knew I wasn't. "It takes a documented pattern of fraud," I replied, stepping forward until I was just inches from his personal space. "And it takes one person with the signature authority who actually bothered to read the fine print of your community service pledges. You denied a bed to a woman on March 14th, while Suite 402 and 405 were being held empty for potential donor arrivals. That's a violation of the EMTALA statutes and the terms of your federal block grant." I leaned in closer, my voice a whisper that only he could hear. "You thought she was a nobody, Alistair. You thought her life was a rounding error on your balance sheet. But it turns out she's the most expensive mistake you've ever made." Thorne's face drained of color, the Amalfi tan turning a sickly ashen gray. He opened his mouth to speak, but for the first time in his career, the words didn't come. Just then, the north elevator pinged, the doors opened, and a man in a dark suit with a federal badge clipped to his belt stepped out, followed by 4 others carrying black equipment cases. The men from the Office of Inspector General didn't look like the police. They looked like accountants who had spent a decade training for tactical insertion. They moved with a terrifying, quiet efficiency, fanning out across the atrium. 2 of them headed straight for the server room behind the reception desk. The others stood like sentinels at the exits. "Agent Miller," I said, acknowledging the lead man. He nodded once, a brief, professional courtesy. "The warrant is being served electronically to your board of directors as we speak, Dr. Thorne. We're here for the physical backups and the unencrypted communication logs from the internal scheduling portal, specifically the priority tier overrides." Thorne finally found his voice, though it was an octave higher than it had been 60 seconds ago. "This is an overreach. This is a gross violation of patient privacy. HIPAA alone." "HIPAA doesn't protect you from a federal investigation into systemic fraud and misappropriation of government funds, Doctor," Thorne interrupted, his voice as flat as a dial tone. "In fact, your HIPAA compliance officer is currently being interviewed in the West Annex. She was surprisingly cooperative once she saw the signature on the subpoena." Thorne turned to me, his eyes wide, the pupils dilated with the first hit of genuine panic. You think you can just walk in here and dismantle a 30-year legacy because of a bureaucratic dispute? I have senators on my speed dial. I have a board that includes 3 former cabinet members." I leaned back against the marble reception desk, watching Elena, the receptionist, as she sat paralyzed, her hands trembling over her keyboard. "You're still thinking in terms of influence, Alistair. You're still playing the game where a phone call over a glass of scotch fixes everything. But you missed the shift. You didn't realize that when you accepted those Section 1115 waivers, you didn't just take the money. You signed a debt covenant with the federal government." I pulled a thin, blue-bound folder from my briefcase. I didn't hand it to him. I held it just out of reach. "Let's talk about the logistics of your ruin," I said, my voice dropping into a clinical, rhythmic cadence. "St. Jude's isn't as liquid as you'd like the world to believe. You leveraged the future federal grants to secure the bridge loans for your new oncology wing. You told the banks that the $14 million was a guaranteed receivable. You used it as collateral to maintain your debt-to-equity ratio." Thorne's throat hitched. He knew exactly where I was going. "By issuing a rescission of funding based on material breach of public trust, I haven't just taken away your playground money. I've triggered a technical default clause in your private lending agreements with Goldman and Deutsche Bank. Because the federal government has flagged this institution for fraud, your private creditors have the right to call in their loans immediately. All of them, totaling, if I recall the quarterly filing correctly, about $280 million. The color didn't just leave Thorne's face, it seemed to leave his entire body. He looked smaller, his expensive, custom-tailored suit suddenly appearing 3 sizes too large. He reached out to steady himself against a mahogany pillar, the very wood he'd likely hand-selected. "You're a sociopath. To destroy an entire hospital, the patients, the research." "I'm not destroying the hospital, Alistair. I'm just removing the cancer. The patients will be fine. The research will continue, but it won't be under the Thorne banner, and it certainly won't be funded by the public while you use that same public as a disposable resource." Behind us, the sound of a heavy door being forced open echoed through the atrium. The federal team had reached the executive archives. One of the doctors who had been flanking Thorne took a step back, physically distancing himself from the man who was now a biohazard to his career. "You see, Alistair," I said, opening the folder and finally showing him the document. "This isn't just a rescission, this is a recommendation for federal receivership. Since St. Jude's can no longer meet its debt obligations and is under investigation for criminal fraud, the government is stepping in to stabilize the asset. We're not closing you down, we're seizing you." I watched his eyes dart across the page, searching for a loophole, a typo, a breath of hope. He found none. The language was airtight, drafted by a team of lawyers I'd personally overseen, people who had lost family members to unavoidable administrative errors, just like I did. "The board," Thorne stammered, "they'll fight this. They'll never agree to a federal takeover." "The board is currently in an emergency session," I replied, checking my phone. "But they're not fighting the takeover. They're discussing your termination for cause. They've realized that if they sacrifice you and provide us with the records of your private VIP directives, they might be able to negotiate a settlement that keeps them out of a federal penitentiary. They're not your friends, Alistair. They're investors, and you just became a toxic asset." Thorne's knees finally gave out. He sat down heavily on a plush velvet bench meant for waiting dignitaries. His hands were folded in his lap, shaking. The arrogance had been stripped away, leaving behind a hollow, frightened old man who couldn't understand why his world had stopped working. "8 months ago," I said, standing over him, "I sat in a plastic chair in a waiting room that smelled like industrial cleaner. I begged a man half your age for a chance to save my mother. He told me the system wasn't designed for people like her. He was right. The system was designed for people like you." I leaned down, my face inches from his face. "But here's the thing about systems, Alistair. They're just math, and I've spent the last 8 months changing the variables." Agent Miller walked over, holding a black encrypted hard drive. "We have the scheduling logs, ma'am. March 14th is fully recovered. Every email, every text, every don't admit order from Thorne's private account." I looked at Thorne. He looked like he was about to be sick. The clinical indifference of the hospital he built was now being turned back on him. "Dr. Thorne," I said, my voice cold and final, "you are no longer the chief medical officer of this institution. In fact, you are no longer a member of the medical staff. Please hand your credentials to Agent Miller. If you attempt to access the clinical floors or the executive suites, you will be arrested for trespassing and obstruction." He looked up at me, his eyes wet, with a pathetic, late-breaking realization. "Who are you?" I straightened my jacket, the Celine wool smooth under my fingers. "I'm the rounding error that finally came due." I turned my back on him and walked towards the elevators, the ones that led to the VIP suites. This time, no one stopped me. The staff, who had spent years ignoring anyone without a 7-figure portfolio, now watched me with a terrifying, silent reverence. They knew the hierarchy had flipped. The queen was dead. Long live the auditor. I pressed the button for the 4th floor. The 4th floor didn't look like a revolution. It looked like an eviction. When the elevator doors opened, the silence was different. It wasn't the cushioned hush of the elite anymore. It was the frantic, low-frequency hum of a beehive being smoked out. I walked past the Gold Suite signage, hand-painted calligraphy on frosted glass, and watched a federal technician peel the letters off with a razor blade. Behind him, 2 nurses in standard-issue blue scrubs, brought in from the public university hospital across town, were rolling a gurney into the room Mother was supposed to have had. I walked into the executive boardroom. The mahogany table, which could probably seat 30, was cluttered with lukewarm coffee and the debris of a collapsed empire. The board of directors, the titans of industry, the former cabinet members, the men who usually dictated the weather in this city, were huddled in the corner. They looked like they were waiting for a firing squad. "Gentlemen," I said, not bothering to sit. I stood at the head of the table, the seat Thorne had occupied for 3 decades. "I've reviewed the emergency bylaws. As the court-appointed receiver, I've decided to simplify your afternoon. You are all being relieved of your fiduciary duties, effective immediately. Your indemnification clauses are suspended pending the outcome of the fraud investigation. You have 20 minutes to clear your digital footprints before the OIG seizes your personal devices." A man in a pinstriped suit, a former senator whose name usually carried the weight of a mountain, stood up. "You can't just dissolve a board of this stature. There are protocols. There is a hierarchy." "The hierarchy changed at 8:01 a.m., I said, my voice cutting through his protest like a wire through wax. "You're operating on a legacy OS. I've just updated the software. You spent 10 years treating this hospital like a private equity play, maximizing yield by filtering out the unprofitable human element. You traded federal compliance for a higher EBITDA. In the eyes of the law, you aren't directors anymore, you're co-conspirators." I turned to my assistant, who was already marking names off a digital list. "Cancel the contracts with the luxury concierge service, fire the PR firm that's been burying the malpractice suits, and the executive wellness wing, convert it into an acute respiratory ward by Monday. I want 60 new beds online before the first snow hits." "You're destroying the brand," the senator hissed. "I'm restoring the purpose," I replied. "Now get out, before I decide to let the press in through the side entrance while you're leaving." They left. It wasn't a dignified exit. It was a shuffle of expensive shoes and bruised egos. I found Thorne in his office. He wasn't packing. He was sitting behind his desk, staring out the floor-to-ceiling window at the city he thought he owned. The room was filled with the artifacts of a high-status life: a signed letter from a president, a piece of moon rock encased in lucite, a collection of vintage fountain pens that had signed 1,000 death warrants disguised as medical discharges. He didn't look up when I entered. "It took me 40 years to build this," he said, his voice a ghost of its former resonance. "I brought in the best surgeons in the hemisphere. I made this the standard for global healthcare." "You made it a country club with an MRI machine, Alistair. You didn't build a standard, you built a fortress, and you used the public's bricks to do it." I picked up one of his fountain pens, a heavy, gold-plated Mont Blanc. I turned it over in my hands. "Do you know what's the most expensive thing in this room is?" He didn't answer. "It's not the moon rock," I said. "It's the vacancy of bed 402 on the night of March 14th. That single empty bed cost you everything: your career, your reputation, your freedom. It's a fascinating bit of math, isn't it? You thought that bed was worth more empty, reserved for a potential donor, than it was with my mother in it." Thorne finally looked at me. There was no fire left in his eyes, just a cold, hollowed-out resentment. "You did all of this for one woman, one patient who was already statistically compromised." "No," I said, leaning over the desk until our eyes were level. I did this because you forgot the fundamental law of the system you exploited. You thought status was a shield. You thought because you were elite, the rules were just suggestions. But status isn't armor, Alistair. It's a loan, and the interest rates on arrogance are astronomical. I dropped the pen onto the desk. It made a dull plastic clatter. My mother survived, I said, and for the first time I let a sliver of warmth touch my voice. Not because of you, because of a nurse in a crowded, underfunded ER who stayed 4 hours past her shift to watch her vitals. A woman you've probably never noticed. That nurse has more worth in her pinky finger than you have in your entire portfolio. She is the system. You were just the parasite. I walked to the door, stopping with my hand on the handle. The marshals are waiting for you in the lobby. I'd suggest you use the service elevator. It's the one you made the ordinary people use. It seems fitting that you finally see how it feels to be moved through the building like freight. I stepped out into the hallway. The chaos was starting to settle into a new kind of order. The air felt lighter, stripped of the heavy, artificial scent of luxury. It smelled like a hospital now. It smelled like work. It smelled like the beginning of something honest. I walked toward the north elevator and pressed lobby. As the doors opened, I looked at my reflection in the polished steel. I didn't see a daughter seeking revenge. I didn't see a high-status auditor. I saw a person who had finally balanced the books. Wealth can buy you access. It can buy you silence. It can even buy you a seat at the table where the world is carved up. But it can't change the fundamental physics of a life. At the end of the day, status is just a story we tell ourselves to feel safe from the dark. But the dark doesn't care about your titles. It doesn't care about your donors. It only cares about the light you left on for someone else. I stepped into the elevator and pressed lobby. The doors closed, and for the first time in 8 months, I let myself breathe.